In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this really quite simple tote bag. I've used Lewis and Irene fabric, it's Hannah's Flowers, which I think match together beautifully. You can make them in plain fabrics if you wish, or indeed it doesn't have to be cotton. You could use something like a denim or a canvas if you prefer. The bottom section here is quilted, it's fully lined, and on the inside here you've got two nice big patch pockets as well, so it's going to keep you nicely organised. And of course you can shorten or lengthen the straps on those if you wanted to. I've left all of the materials list and the cutting details in the description box underneath the video, so have a look through that, get your fabrics organised, and let's get sewing. So I've cut out all of my fabric pieces. Those are the handles. This is going to be for the front and the back of the bag, and then I've got a coordinating plain lining, and that's going to be a patch pocket on the inside. So let's start off with the front and back of the bag. So I'm going to take my small contrasting strip first of all and fold this in half and press it. Then I'll take the long handles, there'll be two of these, and we're going to fold the long sides to the centre and then in half again and press them. So I'll just bring up my ironing pad. Normally use a larger one for larger projects like this, but this little one's going to work fine. And again, let's, oops, stand you up there, fold in half and press. If you find that your fabric doesn't want, easier from this side for me, doesn't want to crease very well, then do try a little bit of spray starch or best press just to give it a nice crease. This is 100% cotton. It's Lewis and Irene fabric, it's lovely quality, and it creases really well, which is exactly what we want it to do. So that's going to be my contrast border. You could have used a little bit of piping there if you wish. Let's now iron this one in half. This is going to make the long straps, which you could make longer or shorter if you wish. So I'm just folding in half to crease the centre point, and then we'll fold the long sides to the centre, then in half again. So I will have 4 layers of fabric, which makes it a nice sturdy strap. So to the centre and press, and we'll do this on both sides. Right, then I'm going to top stitch along both sides. So I'm going to increase the length of my stitch to a 2.8 on my sewing machine, and we'll sew. Then we'll take the bottom section and I'm going to sew the contrast binding straight across the top. So I'm not going to pin this, find it easier not to, so just line up the raw edges, and I'm just going to sew quite close to the edge to attach this. Because the second line of stitching when I put the top on will be a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this needs to be within the seam allowance so you don't see 2 rows of stitches. There we go, my binding was a little bit too long, so I'll just trim this down to size. And then let's add the strap. So I'm going to measure 4 inches and then pop the strap on, and I'm overlapping that by 1 inch. Facing downwards, so I'll pop a pin in there to hold that in place. And then the same on this side. So let's wrap the strap around, making sure that it's not twisted. And again, that's 4 inches in, 1 inch deep. pop a pin in here. I'm just going to double check that I haven't got a twist in the strap. I have got a twist in the strap. Oh no, we're fine. Then let's place the second fabric on the top, right sides together. I'm going to sew from this side so I can see where my previous seam allowance was. And I will have a few pins in there just to hold that in place. So I want to make sure that the handles are facing downwards at a right angle. We don't want them kind of moving to one side a little bit or being at an angle to the seam. Okay, and now I'm going to sew with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And take your pins out as you sew. Okay, just put those back in the bin cushion. Let's open this up and take those pins out. And that's how we're looking. So let's give that a quick press again. And I'm going to press that contrast piece of fabric so that it's facing upwards. Right. Then this in turn is going to go over some H630 I'm using for this one. So that's a fusible fleece. You could use a thicker one, an H640. You could use a fusible foam. If you don't have anything fusible like this, then you could use a wadding or a batting, maybe an 8-20. And you may find that having a little bit of basting spray, like an Odif 505 spray, will help to hold that wadding in place as we're quilting it. So with this one, it's a Valaiseline H630. You can use plenty of steam with it. That's why I like this one, because it doesn't wrinkle. Bosal has the same effect. Their fusible fleece doesn't wrinkle. I like those two particularly. Haven't tried any other brands, to be honest, but I do like these two. So just make sure that that's well and truly stuck down. Try not to touch the fleece with your iron because it's got glue on it. You don't want that getting onto your iron. Right, almost there. This is why I say I normally use a larger ironing area, but coping very well with this little one. So no wrinkles, no creases. That's looking very nice. So let's trim this down to size. I'm also going to cut a 2-inch or 5 centimetre square from each bottom corner, and that's going to help me make the base square. So it's going to be quite a deep base on this one. That'll give me a base that measures about 3.5 inches across. So it's a nice big bag. Okay. Now I can sew the straps in place. What I do like to do before I sew them is to glue them. Only down the centre, not where I'm actually going to stitch. And I am going to sew around about up to here, so maybe 3 inches from the top. And 2 reasons for this. It helps to keep the fabric nice and flat as I'm sewing, but it also adds extra strength to the strap. So make sure that's straight. Same on this side. And I'm using a Gutermann HT2 glue, which I love. It's a clear glue. It's really, really strong. It's a wet glue, so it's got a little time to manoeuvre. I'm just going to wipe the excess glue off the end of there so I'm not wasting it. Do make sure that you always put the lid back on because it does tend to spill a little bit if you don't. So I'm going to leave that to dry before I sew. and then I'll sew in a box like that. I'm not going to do a little box with a cross in at the end, I don't think it needs it. But when you consider all of the weight of the bag is taken on this little seam here at the end of the straps, by adding the glue and adding the stitches, you've got a really, really strong bag. So you should be able to take some heavy shopping in this one. So let's make that square in the bottom here. So I'm just looking for a, oh, there we go, for a pen. Doesn't have to be erasable, you're not going to see the pen mark. And I'm just going to draw a 2-inch square in each bottom corner, and then I'll cut those out. And we'll need to do this with the front and the back. Remember, we're going to do 2 pieces that are identical. Now I'm going to quilt the bottom half. Not necessary, but I like the look of that. And I've got a bit of a tip for you as well, because I'm only going to quilt up to this line, and I don't want lots of back tacking as the stitches start and stop. So let's take a 45-degree angle. I'm going to start in the centre and draw a line. Now this does need to be an erasable pen. If you're going to use heat erasable like I am, do a patch test first and make sure that it's not going to bleach the fabric, because that can happen sometimes. If you don't have an air erasable pen, you could use this is a heat erasable pen. You could use air or water erasable. Do be aware that if you iron either of those pens, you could make the markings permanent, or you could use a chalk pencil or marker. Just something so that you can see the lines to quilt over. So just going all in one direction. I'm doing 2-inch lines here. This is called cross hatching. You could make them narrower if you wish. Don't have to quilt at all if you don't want to. Now where I come to the top of the point here, that's where I'm going to start my next diagonal line in the opposite direction. So when I come to quilt, I'm going to, let me just mark that a little bit stronger so you can see it better. I'm going to quilt up to the point and then back down, up to the point and then back down, and that means that I get a V shape at the top instead of having to stop and backstitch and stop and backstitch, or maybe pull all the threads through to the opposite side. So it just makes it a little bit neater when I'm stopping the quilting line out of a seam. If you're going into a seam, then that doesn't matter at all, but I just think personally this just looks a little bit neater when you don't see the ends of the threads. Let's turn that around and finish off this way. There. So now I'm going to use a long stitch on the sewing machine, so I'm going to go back up to a 2.6 on my machine and quilt over all of those lines. So again, I'm going to go up to that point, stop with the needle down and turn around and back down the opposite side. And we'll continue until all the lines are quilted. Now, a good way of checking that you've covered all of the lines is to now turn this over and make sure that you don't see anything missing from the back. Now, because I've used a heat erasable pen, I can now take my iron and remove all of those lines. So I just get that lovely quilted effect. It can be a little bit more time consuming, but I think it's worth it. I think quilting on amazing fabrics like this really does set it off. Next thing to do here is to sew along the same stitch lines around about 3 inches from the top. You could measure and mark that if you wish, and then back down the opposite side on both of the straps. There's one, and again this just it keeps the strap in place, but it gives you that extra strength as well. over to the second strap. Same distance from the top, needle down, pivot around, and then back down this side. So that's the outside finished, and then we'll need to do another piece exactly the same, which I've already done for the opposite side. Let's take our lining fabric, and we're going to use the piece that we've finished as a template to cut out the exact same size. So I've allowed a little bit extra of the lining fabric, because depending on your seam allowance, your fabrics, we want to make sure that this is the same size. So when this is finished, because it's in more than one piece, I find it easier then to cut out my lining piece so we know it's exactly the same. So just trim this away. And then we're going to add a patch pocket to the inside. Now, if you prefer, you could put a pocket on the front and on the back of the lining. If you've seen any of my tutorials before now where I put what I call a letterbox zip pocket inside there, then of course you could fit a zip as well. So you could make it a lot more pocketed than I have with this one, but I'll leave that up to you. Let's just trim this down the side again. I'd normally use my rotary cutter ruler and mat for cutting straight lines like this, but I thought it might be quicker if I just use the scissors I have to hand. Almost there. Whoops, that's why I like my rotary cutter. Just trim down this side a little. There we go. Oh, nope, this one too. Okay, so I've got two pieces of lining. Cut to size. Let's put the pocket on. So I take one piece of lining, and here's my pocket piece. So first of all, my pocket piece is the same width as the lining, as you can see. So the ends of the pocket are going to go into the side seam, so I don't need to sew those. So I'm going to sew across the top and across the bottom to make a tube, and those will be, of course, right sides together. So I have used the same fabric on the front and the back. If you wanted it to be a little bit more cost effective, then try using a piece of lining fabric on the inside of the pocket, because that's the bit that really you're not going to see. So it may be a little bit wasteful to use more expensive fabric on the inside. So again, just down both edges, and then we'll turn this through. So back again down here. Now I'm going to divide this pocket into two. If you preferred, you could divide it into three. You could make pen pockets from it by making very small dividing lines. I'll show you that in just a second. But let's turn this through to the right side and press it. So that goes there. So with the seam right on the edge, I'm just going to press the top and bottom so it's nice and flat, and then I'm going to top stitch along the top of it. That's that. So this is a non-directional fabric, so it doesn't really matter which is the top and bottom. So if you have a directional, you're just going to top stitch along the top seam, and that helps to keep the two pieces of fabric together, but it also, I think, looks nice. If I'd have used maybe the orangey colour as a top stitch so you can see it, I think it would look lovely. Now we're going to place this across the lining. And I'll just place the ruler on there actually, so I know that that's straight. And we're going to go, let's do 3.5 inches from the top. So I'll pop a couple of pins in here. And I'm going to sew across the bottom and then just at the top here within the seam allowance, just to hold that in place so I can take the pins out. So quite close to the seam now, because this is the bottom of the pocket, so we don't want to take up too much pocket space with the seam allowance. And then just turn this around, and I'm just going to kind of sew in the seam allowance up here just to hold that together so I can take the pins out while we construct the bag. And same on this side. So out you come. So I'm going to put one seam down here. You could put 2 seams. You could have these any size that you like. You could make smaller seams to make pen pockets. But I'm just going to have the one, so I'm going to fold this in half and crease that line. And as the line doesn't stand out so much, I'm going to draw over that with my erasable pen as well. Make sure that's nice and straight. And then sew down here. And always backstitch when you come to the top of the pocket, because if there's any strain on the seam, that's where it's going to give. Alright, so that's the inside of my bag finished. Again, if you wanted to add an extra pocket to the opposite side, then that would be quite useful. Let's take one of the outer pieces of my bag, and we're going to sew these right sides together across the top. So pin if you wish. I will put a couple of pins in here. Like so. And sew together straight across here. And then we'll do the same with the second piece. Then these 2 sections are going to go right sides together. We need to make sure that the strap is out of the way of the seam. And match the seams at the side. I'm going to push the seam allowance towards the bag, not towards the lining. And when I come to the section here, I want to make sure again that that seam is lined up. So that's where I'm going to put my pins. So in the top here, let's fold that again towards the lining. Match the seam here. If it doesn't match, you can see that isn't perfect. If I spread the fabric out perfectly, I'm about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/16 of an inch out. It's not quite there. You can ease that. It shouldn't be so far out that you get any wrinkles or puckers. But if you can make those seams match, would be ideal, because nobody will notice. The thing is, they'll notice if they don't match. Now we're going to go all the way around the edge. Don't sew over the cutout corners. And I'm going to leave a turning gap, I think in the bottom this time, of around about 4 inches or 10 centimetres, so enough so I can actually get my hand inside. And I'm going to take those cut out corners, open them up, make sure that the seams are sitting together, and I'm going to sew straight across, and I'm going to squish the seams in opposite directions as I sew to cut down on the bulk. And we'll need to do that in all 4 corners. So there we go, seams in opposite directions. Then we'll do the same with the opposite side here. So again, open this up, match the seams. Now this time on the first side, I squish the top seam in this direction, so I'm going to go in the same direction and have the side seam in the opposite direction and sew straight across. You can stick a pin in there if you think it'll help. And then we'll repeat that exactly with the lining pieces. Now let's turn the whole thing the right side out through the turning gap that you left in the lining. I'm just going to put my hand inside here and push out those corners. And then with the turning gap in the lining, I'm going to pull each side away from each other. The sides will fold over and then machine stitch straight across. If you wanted that to be completely invisible, maybe this is a bag that you're going to sell or give as a gift, then I'd maybe hand sew that with a ladder stitch, or at least use the same colour thread to sew the opening close. Mine's a cream against a rusty orange, which does stand out a bit. But it's only the bottom of the bag, so I don't think anybody's going to notice that. Right, then let's push the lining inside the bag. I'm going to press around the top just to get that seam right on the edge. If you cut your lining a little bit longer, and in fact let's do this, we can roll the lining very slightly so you get a little bit of a border without it affecting the size of the lining. If you cut your lining maybe a centimetre or half an inch longer, then you can create that border that looks like binding just around the top. But just a little roll like this will give you a glimpse of the contrasting lining fabric, but without compromising the size of the lining. We don't want the lining to be smaller than the outer bag, basically. Not that you'd notice, to be honest. So I can just roll that very slightly. And then we'll top stitch just to hold all of that in place. So back to the ironing board, to the sewing machine, and literally sew all the way around the top. So nice long stitch on this one as it's a top stitch, and let's sew. One final press. Now if, I haven't got it here with me, if you have a tailor's ham, or one of the long thinner ones, one of the sleeve versions, that's a good idea to pop it inside the bag now and press so that you don't press the seams flat. You can press them but without pressing them flat. But my little ironing board, although I thought it was quite small for a project like this, actually comes in quite useful because it'll fit inside the bag. And even on the base seam, oops, let's pop that on the, oops, on the end of the ironing board, and I can just press across there as well. If you wanted to make that a little bit squarer in the base, then you can kind of fold this so the bottom goes in like that, and then give it another press across there. And again, maybe a bit of best press will hold that in place, or your spray starch, and we can just pinch the sides there to crease that as well. There, and that's my bag finished. So you can see it's quite a quick project, really. Nice long straps in there. You can make those shorter if you wanted to, as I said earlier. And remember, on the inside, you've got two nice patch pockets to keep nice and organised as well. So I hope you enjoy making yours. Make them to gift, make them to sell, make them to keep yourself, make them in any kind of fabric that you wish. It could be canvas, it could be denim, whatever you prefer. But the most important thing is that you enjoy making yours. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.